I'm going to breeze through this just in the interest of time, but in case you don't already know about this, I just want to make it clear because it's helpful in your strategic planning process. It's in the book too, by the way, but it's also helpful when you're communicating to your employees, how do we make money in this company anyway, and what is your role? On the far left is the return on sales computation. It's a fraction. Pre-tax profit divided by sales. In this case, we have a $10 million division, or a $10 million company. $300,000 of pre-tax profit divided by $10 million of sales is a 3% return on sales. So that's a measurement of how well we manage sales growth, margins, and people and non-people expenses. The second measurement is our asset turnover. Of course, 80% of our assets are receivables and inventory. In this case, we have a $10 million revenue distribution location or company, has $2.5 million of assets, which is about 4 times asset turnover. And of course, you'll notice that if 80% of the receivables, or rather 80% of the assets are receivables and inventory, the receivables and inventory are about $2 million. It's a fairly realistic assessment of a typical branch-based distributor. Now finally, a little more complicated, we have leverage, which is a fraction of assets in the numerator divided by the owner's equity. We have $2.5 million of assets from the other fraction there, and then $1 million of owner's equity. So our leverage is 2.5 to 1. We usually look at that in terms of a debt-to-equity ratio, which would be our debt here. If we have $2.5 million of assets and we have $1 million of owner's equity, we have $1.5 million of debt. So the debt-to-equity ratio would be $1.5 million of debt divided by $1 million of equity, which would be 1.5. And my point here, guys, this is a very conservative balance sheet for this little distributor, which happens to make a 3% return on sales. They turn their assets over 4 times. So their return on assets is 12%. 3 times 4 is 12. In fact, if we take their return of $300,000 and divide by the asset base, which is $2.5 million, that's going to be 12%. Then we add another factor here, which is our leverage, which is 2.5 to 1, and we get to finally our pre-tax profit divided by owner's equity. If you remember, when you multiply fractions, you just cross out the numerators and denominators that are the same. So we have pre-tax profit of $300,000 divided by $1 million of owner's equity of $1 million, and we have a 30% pre-tax return on investment, which is really great. It's a whole lot better than investing in the stock market if this is a sustainable investment in a wholesale distributor. And the great thing about wholesale distribution is we can use leverage because our asset turnover is really high compared to a manufacturer, which is more like 2 to 1 or 2.5 to 1. And also, we have a lot of leverage potential because this company's borrowing $1.5 million, as I said. They have $2 million in receivables and inventory. A whole bunch of that borrowing they're making is coming from their vendors who are giving them an interest-free loan to support their inventory, which is the way our businesses work. Now, depending on the terms in your industry, obviously your company is going to look a little different than that. But one of the great things about wholesale distribution is we get leverage from our suppliers. We don't have any interest expense on that leverage. And if we can make even a little bit of a change in our return on sales, if we can improve that by 1%, let's say we increased our overall gross margin in our company 1% through a strategic pricing initiative, and we increased our gross margin by only 1 percentage point, we could actually increase our return on sales to 4%. Our return on investment would increase by 10 percentage points up to 40%. So that's the example I want you to just keep in mind, is that we have a lot of leverage. Every little change we make in return on sales for us is multiplied by 10, because we're multiplying by 4 times 2.5 is 10. Every little change here multiplied by 10 to get to that return on equity. So it makes our business an industry that private equity investors are very interested in, and I'm sure you're very aware of it. Private equity firms have been making huge investments in wholesale distribution. They discovered that our little prosaic world that we live in, with our razor-thin margins, and our business is a game of inches, and it's buy low, sell high, collect fast, pay slow, and we're all C students, but somehow we can make a lot of money if we play our cards just right. So wholesale distribution is a very high return on investment business.